Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maria Gillen, and I'm so pleased to welcome you here to this distinguished poetry series. As you know, one of our readings in the month is always on Zoom, and the other one is in person, because we saw during the pandemic that by doing it on Zoom, some of the time we could reach people farther away that would normally come to a reading at the Poetry Center. So we're trying a mixture of both things so that we reach more people. I'm very pleased to say that today we're going to have Suzanne Cleary read, and that none of these readings would be possible without funding from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, individual contributions from people who are members and supporters of the Poetry Center, and also from Passaic County Community College, which provides us a lot of in-kind support as well as monetary support. And I have to thank the president of the college, Dr. Stephen Rose, for his unfailing support of the Poetry Center and what we're trying to do and what we've been trying to do since 1980. Anyway, Suzanne Cleary, her most recent books are Crude Angel, published in 2018 by Bookmark Press, University of Missouri, Kansas City, and Beauty Mark, Bookmark Press, 2013. She's a recipient of a Pushcart Prize. Her other awards include a John Chardy Prize, the Cecil Hemley Memorial Award of the Poetry Society of America, the Troubadour International Poetry Prize, and fellowships from McDowell and Yaddo. Her poems appear on PBS's NewsHour.org and Poetry Daily in anthologies including Best American Poetry and the Foreign Book of Poetry 2022, and in journals including the Atlantic Southern Review, Poetry International, and Poetry London. A member of the Kent and Sussex Poetry Society, she teaches in the Tunbridge Wells Poetry Festival, Tunbridge Wells, UK. She also teaches as core faculty in the Converse University MFA in Creative Writing Program that's in Pittsburgh, and is seeking a publisher for her new book manuscript. Her website is www.suzannecleary-poet.com. And I'd like to say about Suzanne that her poems are beautifully crafted but risky. He's willing to tell the truth in a poem and to make us really feel it. But she has a great grasp of craft and has an ability to touch the reader and the listener and make them really go along on whatever journey she's taking us on. Let's welcome Suzanne Cleary.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely and generous introduction. I am thrilled to be reading for the Poetry Center under the direction of Maria Gillen and with the fine assistance of Smita Desai. I'm just thrilled to be here with you, and I thank each one of you who are Zooming today with me. Some poems need introductions. I don't think my first poem does. I think the title pretty much says what it's about. The poem is called Emergency Room. When it's your heart, you go to the front of the line, ahead of the humpbacked woman holding a rosary, and the construction worker holding his side, and the woman with long brown hair holding a baby. You go ahead of the boy with his arm in a towel, his father holding a cell phone and not looking up. You walk 2 steps and then you feel a wheelchair at the back of your knees and you sit. I sat. The fluorescent light seemed to shimmer like a bead curtain, and I'm not saying that I saw my life flash before me, but next I was seeing that day in Rome when I stood inside the front door of my hotel watching rain, sudden and hard, fall. and that old man appeared with a blue plastic bucket full of umbrellas. How happy I was, I remembered, to have my choice of colors: red, blue, black, yellow. I chose a red one, then I put it back. I wanted the yellow. Everyone on our tour was choosing, and my husband helping me to open the cheap, overpriced umbrella as rain beaded on my glasses, and it became clear that we would let nothing stop us, not that day. Okay. And I just taught a workshop uh, here for the Poetry Center with a wonderful group of poets. And our subject was writing poems based on fact, sometimes poems based on things we've read. And this next poem is based on something I read. I'm a great one for reading obituaries in the newspaper. They're the first things I read. And my father did that too. And this poem is based on an obituary from a long time ago now. It took me a long time to write the poem. The obituary is dated February 19th, 2010. It's from the New York Times. And this obituary is the epigraph for the poem. The obituary reads, a longtime Manhattan resident, Ms. Fran Lee advised radio and television audiences on household and consumer issues from the late 1940s until well into the 90s. Her purview ranged from cyclamates to asbestos to how to make a candle from a sausage. Sausage candle. Stick a wick in a sausage and light it, and you've got a candle. It's flame fed by fat. Not that you'd burn it on your birthday cake. Not that you'd light two and process to an altar. Not that you'd want one, even a small one, flickering over your romantic dinner. But the sausage candle gives light. The sausage candle gives light. Think of the books you could read by the light of that candle. Think of the dark passages it might, given the chance, illuminate. It is better to light one sausage than to curse the darkness. Imagine, for a moment, you dare set a sausage candle atop your birthday cake, and you close your eyes and you wish. Think of the wishes you could make if you weren't afraid of the ridiculous. I think that I do find a lot of my poems in newspapers. I also find a lot of them on television, so many that I think the secret is out that I watch too much television. But this poem is about something that I read in the newspaper. It was an advertisement for something called One Day University. And I was just so taken by that idea that I wanted to spend more time thinking about it. So I started a poem. Often that's the way a poem begins for me. I just simply want to remember something that I've come across, and then I want to think about it. This poem is called One Day University. My neighbor, whose parents divorced in 1962, drives a 1961 Pontiac, a sky blue Bonneville Classic, excuse me, with a shiny ashtray in each armrest, with windows you have to crank down and up again. A car surprisingly fast, despite or due to its weight, each part of steel, not plastic or composite, whatever that is. The gas mileage is killing me, my neighbor shrugs, smiling, shaking his head the way you do when you know that something is beyond your control and the best you can do is enjoy the ride. Killing me. But each Saturday he wakes early to hose down and soap up that car, to chamois it into shine. Then he drives to One Day University. This weekend's lecture, Lincoln and Kennedy, Imagining Their Second Terms. A professor from Princeton University leading the assembled, I imagine, to Imagine a world in which Lincoln will trade his stovepipe hat for a houndstooth check driving cap, roll his trousers, and take up golf, years into a long retirement. To imagine a world in which Kennedy will fall in slow motion on a wide green lawn as he fake tackles grandkids. I imagine that the good professor, paid well for his time, calls on a stand-in for each president, who thanks the assembled, then describes his second term, the politics that never change. Probably Lincoln would go first, with a plain-spoken vision of the world that might have been, while Kennedy sits behind him on stage, his bad back aching from the metal folding chair. I can imagine nothing sadder than Lincoln and Kennedy present in the same moment, with their strained marriages and strong children. Forget the futures we know lie immutably before them, which is not to minimize the sadness of a lecture hall full of people who have given up their Saturday to cast themselves into another day, back to a moment of tragedy, to imagine they can erase tragedy. No, our American friend, no convertible, no pink pillbox hat pinned so tightly on that it never flies off. My neighbor drives to work in 1961 and drives home in 1961. He drives to the dry cleaner and to the grocery and to the gym, to the post office, to the gym again, all in 1961. The car window rolled down, his elbow hanging out. Wherever he drives, he must drive through 1961 to get there, imagining, as an educated man, not a world before or without sorrow, but a world of alternate, composite sorrows, the wind in his hair. I wrote this next poem. Excuse me. I wrote this next poem after reading a wonderful book by Diane Hales, which is called La Bella Lingua, and it's about Italian culture, but focuses on the bella lingua, Italian. So here's the poem. It is said that until 1950, every Italian could recite by heart 25 lines of Dante, so that in 1944, the partisan shepherd stationed at Pisa, ordered to shoot anyone out after dark without ID, would ask the stranger to recite from Dante's The Divine Comedy in order to prove himself Italian, the dialect to prove himself local. It is said that one night the footsteps were a professor of literature, the text the Inferno, 17th canto, the one where the usurers sit in the sand, unable to lift their eyes from purses hanging from their necks. The professor's frozen breath sparkled, rising from the wooden shack checkpoint. The professor, helpless but to love these words, which make music of wretchedness. The shepherd, helpless but to close his eyes, whether from emotion or fatigue, it would be hard to say. It is said that at line 117, the professor halted. Silent, he raised his hands to his mouth as if fingertips could lift the words from his lips. The shepherd opened his eyes, waited. Then the shepherd cleared his throat, recited the rest of the canto. This is the meaning of every. The shepherd in torn smock, as well as the man in frayed necktie, as well as no need for others to remark upon the transition from one voice to the other, smooth as when a woman with a basket of potatoes passes the braided handle from one arm to the other, so as to carry it home. This next poem is a poem that I got the idea for when I was reading a book about an art book, really, about the drawings of the English painter John Constable. But the poem isn't so much about Constable, it's about a footnote in that book that I found really marvelous. And I did change some of this information for the poem, but I got the idea for it from reading, which is what I've highly recommended in the workshop we just experienced together. The poem is called "Who Among Us?" What the bulldog lacks in grace, it makes up for with lack of grace. Thick-set, low-slung, little pig feet shuffling through wet red leaves beside the river as two men follow at some distance, brothers, one talking and one nodding, all three of them swathed in the fog of early morning after a night of rain, the last drops still falling from the few leaves remaining. November is a hard month, swelling with darkness and chill, but October also was hard, despite purple coneflowers and goldenrod fizzing with bees. The one man slowly shakes his head and the other man nods, as if they are in a library or streetcar or anywhere, while the dog noses the fragrant ground, waddles on, his one gnarled expression expressing nothing, even as his hind leg slips and of course the other one follows, and then the dog is spinning on its stomach down the steep bank into the River Wye. Who among us has not fallen into the River Wye, or into its happier tributary, the Why Not? Who among us has not tensed at the first signs of the trajectory before giving in? Dan, this is dog's name, Dan labors to breathe as he burbles in the shallows and then, as the record states, regains the shore. All of which can be heard in Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations, Opus 36, the opening bars of Variation 2. Good boy, Dan. Good boy. Now, I'm not really sure that you can do that at the end of the poem. Just suddenly, address someone or something directly. But it was fun to do. It was fun to do. Now, I have another poem. Again, kind of based on the fact that I just taught this workshop on using fact. I have another poem based on fact to read to you, and this poem I decided to write after I learned the name of a particular piece of type of wood that I'd never heard of. And so I started to do some research about this wood. And then I found a piece of information that interested me more directly, really. And so I went with that. And that's the thing to do when you're starting a poem. You just search widely, and I think then you go with whatever most excites you, whatever is most fun for you to think about. And then, later on, you can figure out how to craft this piece together. So anyway, this poem that I ended up writing is called Love Spoon. The idea is to take a single piece of wood and carve it into a spoon. Present it to your beloved as a proposal of marriage. The handle thick with hearts and doves and bells and horseshoes, and because this spoon originates in the North Atlantic, with cables and braids and knots, as on Aran sweaters knit to protect the sailor from cold and, to speak the hard truth of it, to identify the body washed ashore. The spoon's handle roils with ornament that emerges in the working, one shape morphing into another, or into a nameless shape between definite shapes. The carver does not belabor the distinction between figure and ground, as love does not belabor the distinction between chore and gift. But when it is time to fashion the spoon's bowl. Accuracy and proportion must reign. The bowl substantial yet graceful, neither too wide nor too deep. Although the love spoon most often gleams from the mantle or hangs from a decorative hook, it must be able to serve stewed carrots to a baby, strained soup to a parent. It is made for use, as love may teach us to take the deep bowl of each day by whatever rough handle and lift the lime wood to our lips. I'm going to read two more poems. And in this next poem, which is actually quite a recent poem, you will definitely hear that I did some research on something from pop culture, and you'll also hear some other things that may or may not be true. And I will not tell you if the premise of this poem is true. I just won't tell you. The poem is called Literary Discussion. We're standing in the conference room discussing Emily Dickinson's Scientific Eye, when at some point I say Angie, as in Angie Dickinson. And I stop dead, I blanch. I am ready to fake cough, back away. When I notice no one seems to have heard me say Angie. They probably are too young to remember her. She of the lacquered white blonde page boy that never moved from the early 60s until maybe today, for I think she is still alive. And so I let my slip slide, sure as Angie Dickinson performing a soft shoe beside Frank Sinatra, both of them wearing tuxedos, but Angie wearing only the top half, her long legs bare except for glossy nylon stockings. Angie of the turquoise eyeshadow, her eyes, whatever she trained them upon, full of adoration, as a poet's eyes must be, I believe. I could probably relate this to Emily, whose love for the world was thwarted by the world, yet never dimmed. Witness the scrapbooks she assembled of wildflowers and grasses accompanied by Latin names in her tiny script. As the discussion continues, I cannot help but hear Angie's soft purr of a voice and my father's newspaper crinkling in his lap when he heard Angie and looked up at the TV, the only woman he'd ever found beautiful except for my mother. The show was Policewoman, which aired from 1974 to 1978, approximately the worst years of my life. Angie was Pepper Anderson, an undercover cop in LA. With a bit of sleuthing, I discovered that as of 2023, Policewoman is the oldest live action television series with all of its main actors still living, including nonagenarian Dickinson and Earl Holliman. Wasn't Holliman involved in Watergate? No, that was Halderman, and a different world from the one in which we now live. Or maybe it's the same world, but with different actors. My father's been dead nearly 15 years, my mother 2 months later. I read on Wikipedia that by the last season of Policewoman, Dickinson tired of appearing in scenes where the phone rings while I'm taking a bath. Don't we all? I mean, is there any one of us who is not immersed by the time in which we live, in which we have lived, who doesn't carry it with us everywhere? Did you know that Emily Dickinson loved to bake? I offer. She was famous for her bread and cakes. What feeds us, I wonder? I mean, why do we stand together and talk poetry as if we understand where it comes from, as if it isn't nearly always a surprise, and almost embarrassing how much we love it? And my last poem for the day is a poem that is dedicated to the poet Russell Jackson, who was a student of mine in the MFA program in creative writing at Converse University. And now Russell and I we're two poets. We're friends. We show each other poetry, and he especially shows me his work. So this particular poem needs no introduction beyond that because the title is what I call a very informational title. It is informational. The title is For the Poet Who Writes to Me While Standing in Line at CVS, Waiting for His Mother's Prescription. It's nothing that you flat out say, Russell, but your email reminds me that 6 months into pandemic, 5 months into quarantine, CVS remains open 24 hours. Its harsh blue-white light steady as nothing in nature is steady. Those long fluorescent bulbs still dive-bombing lumens so that midnight is bright as 8 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 2 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. You can see that I struggle to carry one thought to the next these long days. I spend hours on the internet, becoming expert on the height of actors from Hollywood's golden age, on the 25 cutest photos of 4-year-old Princess Charlotte. I now know that Elizabeth Bishop was a bit taller than I am, a bit heavier. Her clothes would be too big for me, as no doubt her shoes. Russell, what is it that supposedly concentrates the mind wonderfully? Samuel Johnson said it in Boswell's biography, which I've never read and never will. I know my limits. Lately, I think that I know little else worth knowing. My only advice for your poems, Russell, wash your hands for as long as it takes to sing Happy Birthday. Did you know that song is no longer copyrighted? 5 years ago, U.S. District Court Judge George H. King ruled Happy Birthday is public domain. The 1935 patent applied only to the melody and specific arrangement of the tune, but not to the actual song itself. When Judge King writes actual song, he means lyrics. But I hear him saying song is something beyond the reach of law, beyond reach of language. Song is like a kernel of light inside of things, steady. Russell, be like CVS. I don't know what this means, be like CVS. Russell, dare to say what doesn't make sense. Then wait patiently to see the sense inside of it. Be like CVS. Be like the bewildering variety of toothpastes, decongestants, hair conditioners. Be like orange Velcro knee braces, like spools of pastel ribbon that hums, pulled across a scissor. Be like the aisle of bare shelves where the cleaning products stood, where the white metal shelves now display only how each shelf, with a simple, ingenious hook, fits into the frame. I'm telling you nothing that you don't already know, Russell. Be like whatever accepts the horrid light and shines in it. Be like the 8-ounce can of lightly salted cashews for which you are newly willing to pay $12.99 as you stand in line waiting for the blue-gloved hands to hold out to you the small white bag, which is not for you, except in that you are the one who will carry it where it must go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Those were beautiful poems, and I love the way you use fact to leap off to other thoughts and other parts of the world and other parts of yourself. I love also the way you sneak in little personal references, not necessarily making them clear, but I love the worst years of my life, 74 to 79. You leave the reader wondering what exactly happened during that time. It really was wonderful to hear you. Thank you so much for doing the workshop, and Thank you for sharing your own work with us. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to see you again after so many years. I think the last time I saw you was probably 30 years ago. No, maybe 20.
Well, very, very briefly at the reading to celebrate the publication of the latest wonderful issue of Paterson Literary Review. But it was
Yeah.
too brief, far too brief. And I have loved being here today with you and with everyone, and that's a fact. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good to see you all. If you can hear me, I don't know. I'm confused by technology, obviously. And